the mission begins as the greatest victory in human history, a permanent colony on Mars, the first humans to live on another planet. For Earth, it is a moment of pride. For science, it is a breakthrough beyond imagination. For the crew inside the habitat, it is the start of a new life. But something is already wrong. At first, it is small, a drop in pressure that no one notices, a system warning that flashes and disappears, a backup unit that activates without explanation. Then it escalates. Within days, life support begins to struggle. Oxygen levels fluctuate in ways that should not happen. Carbon dioxide filters work harder than expected. Power systems show instability during normal operation cycles. Inside the habitat, the colonists feel it first in their bodies, a slight dizziness when they wake up, a strange pressure in the chest after routine activity, fatigue that arrives earlier each day. No alarms for danger yet, no visible disaster, only small changes that feel easy to ignore. But Mars does not allow mistakes for long. This is not a planet that simply challenges human survival. It actively destroys the conditions that the human body depends on. The atmosphere is almost entirely carbon dioxide, about 95% of it. There is almost no oxygen to breathe. Outside the habitat, a human would not last more than moments without protection. The pressure on the surface is also dangerously low. It is so thin that liquid water cannot remain stable on the surface for long. Inside a human body, this low pressure creates conditions that are completely unnatural for biology. Even more dangerous is something invisible: radiation. Mars has no global magnetic field like Earth. That means solar radiation and cosmic radiation reach the surface with far less protection. Every second outside shielding, high-energy particles pass through matter, including human tissue. They do not just pass through harmlessly. They strike cells and damage DNA at the most basic level. Most people do not realize this. Survival on Mars is not only about oxygen or food, it is about constant protection from radiation that slowly breaks the instructions of life itself. Inside the colony, everything depends on machines working perfectly. Air recycling systems, pressure control systems, radiation shielding, temperature regulation. The human body is no longer supported by nature. It is supported by engineering. And engineering can fail. When small failures begin to stack up, the environment inside the habitat starts to shift in subtle ways. Oxygen delivery becomes less stable. Carbon dioxide levels rise slightly between cycles. Pressure regulation systems compensate more often than they should. The human body notices before the machines fully fail. Breathing becomes less efficient. The brain receives slightly less oxygen than it needs. Muscles recover more slowly after movement. Sleep becomes unstable. At first, these changes feel like stress or exhaustion. Nothing alarming enough to trigger emergency response. But beneath these symptoms, something more dangerous is happening. Cells in the body are beginning to operate under abnormal conditions. Low pressure and radiation exposure, even at reduced levels, start affecting how cells repair themselves. DNA damage begins at a microscopic scale. Most of it is repaired by the body, but not all of it. Over time, small errors accumulate. Inside a Mars habitat, there is no true margin for error. Every system is operating close to its limit. Every human body inside is doing the same. And when a critical system finally fails, everything changes very quickly. Oxygen levels begin to drop. Not instantly to zero, but enough to trigger immediate biological response. The human brain is extremely sensitive to oxygen loss. Within seconds, clarity begins to fade. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes rapid and uncontrolled. The body tries to compensate, but there is no stable environment to recover in. At the same time, pressure imbalance begins to affect the lungs and bloodstream. Fluids in the body are not designed to exist under such low external pressure. Tissues begin to react in ways that are not normal on Earth. This is not an explosion or instant destruction. It is a collapse of biological stability, and it happens in stages. The first stage is confusion. The brain loses oxygen balance. Thoughts become fragmented. Simple actions require more effort. The second stage is physical breakdown. Cells begin to suffer from lack of oxygen. Muscles weaken rapidly. Coordination becomes unstable. The third stage is system failure. Multiple organs begin to shut down as the body can no longer maintain internal balance. All of this can happen in a very short time. What makes Mars even more dangerous is that there is no natural recovery process. On Earth, the atmosphere stabilizes the human body. Oxygen is constant. Pressure is stable. Radiation is minimal compared to space environments. On Mars, none of these supports exist. Every moment is artificial survival. Even before any visible disaster, the body is always under stress, always adapting, always compensating. And when those compensations fail, the decline is not gradual in the way people expect. It becomes a chain reaction inside the body itself. This is why Mars is not just another destination. It is a biological challenge that pushes human life to its absolute limits. In this video, you will see exactly what happens to the human body when Mars becomes hostile at every level. From oxygen loss to radiation exposure to complete system failure, each stage reveals how fragile human survival truly is outside Earth. You will also learn why some of these effects are not widely discussed, even in popular space missions. There are details about radiation damage, pressure failure, and cellular breakdown that are often simplified in public explanations, but the reality is far more complex. By the end, you will understand why colonizing Mars is not just a question of reaching another planet, but of continuously fighting to keep the human body alive in an environment that is fundamentally incompatible with it. Welcome to the channel. If you want to explore the hidden science behind space, the universe, and human survival beyond Earth, make sure to subscribe. There is much more about to be uncovered. The first failure is never loud. It does not come with impact or explosion. It comes with silence inside the body. A small breach in a suit, a cracked seal in a habitat wall. A system failure that removes one invisible layer of protection. On Mars, that is enough. The moment oxygen supply drops, the human body reacts faster than thought itself. The brain is the first system to feel it. It has almost no storage for oxygen. It depends on a constant flow every second. Within a few seconds, that flow becomes unstable. Neurons begin to misfire. Signals lose clarity. Simple thoughts feel broken into fragments. Confusion appears before awareness of danger. The brain tries to understand what is happening, but it is already losing control of its own processing. Panic follows quickly, not as an emotional choice, but as a biological response. The body senses oxygen loss and floods itself with stress signals. Heart rate rises sharply. Breathing becomes fast and irregular. But on Mars, fast breathing does not restore oxygen. It only wastes remaining reserves faster. Blood oxygen saturation begins to fall at a dangerous speed. Hemoglobin, the molecule that carries oxygen, becomes less and less loaded with each circulation cycle. The entire body starts to operate under emergency conditions at the same time. Muscles weaken. Coordination becomes unstable. Even standing still requires effort. There is another effect that most people do not expect. Pressure loss changes everything. On Earth, human tissue is held together by atmospheric pressure. On Mars, that pressure is extremely low. If the barrier between the body and environment fails, fluids inside the body begin to react in unusual ways. This is known as ebulism. It does not mean boiling like water in a pot. It means body fluids starting to form gas bubbles at normal body temperature because external pressure is too low to keep them stable in liquid form. Blood vessels, tissues, and internal fluids are all affected. Swelling begins in exposed areas. Pain increases rapidly as pressure differences spread through soft tissue. The lungs are among the first organs to suffer structural damage. Air inside them expands as external pressure drops. If a person tries to hold their breath in such conditions, the lungs can tear internally. Even without that, oxygen exchange collapses almost instantly. Every breath becomes less effective, not because of lack of effort, but because there is nothing usable in the surrounding air. At the same time, the lack of oxygen reaches deeper into the brain. Vision starts to narrow. Hearing becomes distorted. Time, perception breaks down. The body is still alive, but control is already slipping away. Consciousness does not fail in a single moment. It fades in layers. First, awareness of surroundings disappears. Then recognition of self becomes unstable. Finally, even basic awareness of breathing and movement breaks down. All of this happens before physical death is complete. The body continues to function in fragments even after the mind has already begun to shut down. Mars is not a true vacuum, but it is close enough to cause a chain reaction inside the human body that feels almost identical in its effects. The atmosphere is extremely thin, so thin that it cannot hold liquids in a stable form on the surface. It also cannot support the normal pressure balance the human body depends on. When a suit or habitat suddenly loses integrity in this environment, the change is not gradual. It is immediate and violent at a microscopic level. The skin is the first visible barrier. At first, it does not break. It remains intact for a short time. But inside the body, everything begins to shift. Gases trapped in blood and tissue start to expand. This is not air being added from outside. It is internal gases growing in volume because external pressure can no longer contain them. Tissues begin to swell. The body does not burst outward instantly. Instead, it inflates unevenly. Areas with more fluid and softer tissue respond faster. This creates internal strain that spreads through the body structure. Blood vessels are under special stress. Capillaries, the smallest vessels in the body, are extremely sensitive to pressure changes. They begin to weaken and rupture in tiny networks. This damage is not immediately visible from the outside, but it spreads quickly through circulation. The eyes are also highly vulnerable. They are filled with delicate fluid systems that depend on stable pressure. When that balance is lost, fluid behavior changes. The surface of the eye and internal structures begin to suffer distortion. Vision becomes unstable even before full loss of consciousness occurs. One of the most misunderstood effects is what happens to body fluids under Mars-level pressure. At such low external pressure, liquids do not behave normally. Water inside tissues can begin to vaporize at body temperature. This does not mean boiling in the traditional sense. It means phase change triggered by lack of pressure support. Microscopic gas bubbles form inside fluids where they should not exist. This process disrupts normal function at a cellular level. Oxygen exchange becomes even less efficient. Tissues that rely on constant fluid balance begin to fail. The lungs experience a similar disruption from the inside. Air already present in the lungs expands dramatically. If the body is still trying to breathe, that expansion becomes destructive rather than supportive. There is no stable equilibrium in this state. Every system in the body is reacting at once to the same environmental collapse. The nervous system begins to shut down signals as damage spreads. Muscle control becomes inconsistent. The brain receives distorted information from oxygen-starved blood and damaged sensory systems. Despite all this, the skin can still appear mostly intact for a short time. This creates a dangerous illusion of structural stability. But inside, the failure is already widespread. The window for survival in these conditions is extremely short, not measured in hours, not even in long minutes in most cases. The body is fighting against a pressure environment it was never designed to withstand, and every second deepens the internal breakdown. Even if the air problem is solved, even if pressure is controlled, another danger is already passing through everything. It cannot be seen. It cannot be smelled. It does not need a breach to enter. Radiation on Mars is constant. On Earth, the planet itself protects life. A strong magnetic field surrounds the planet and deflects much of the high-energy radiation from space. A thick atmosphere also absorbs a large portion before it reaches the surface. Mars has neither of these protections in a meaningful way. So cosmic radiation and solar radiation reach the ground almost directly. They pass through thin air with very little resistance. They pass through habitat walls if shielding is not strong enough. They even pass through the human body itself. At first, nothing is felt. There is no pain signal for radiation. There is no immediate warning in the nervous system. A person can be exposed and still feel completely normal for hours or even days. But inside the body, the damage begins at a microscopic level. DNA strands start to break. DNA is the instruction code for every cell in the body. It controls repair, growth, and function. When radiation strikes, it can damage this code directly. Some breaks are repaired correctly by the cell. The body has repair mechanisms designed for small amounts of damage. But on Mars, frequency of damage is far higher than normal biological repair systems evolved to handle. Over time, repair systems become overwhelmed, errors begin to accumulate, cells that divide start copying damaged instructions. New cells are created with small mistakes in their structure. These mistakes do not always kill a cell immediately. Instead, they slowly reduce efficiency. Energy production becomes less stable. Protein synthesis becomes less accurate. Cell communication becomes distorted. In some tissues, this leads to gradual weakening of function. In others, it increases the risk of uncontrolled growth or failure. One of the lesser-known effects is how radiation affects the body's ability to repair itself over time. It does not only damage DNA, it also affects the enzymes and systems responsible for fixing that damage. So the longer exposure continues, the weaker the repair process becomes. This creates a feedback loop where damage builds faster than recovery. Even short exposure periods can have delayed effects. A person may survive the initial environment failure, return to shelter, and still carry invisible cellular damage. Days later, symptoms begin to appear. Fatigue increases without clear reason. Immune response becomes weaker. Internal inflammation begins to rise. In more severe cases, radiation sickness develops. This is not immediate in most cases of Mars exposure, but it can escalate quickly when shielding fails completely. Cells in the digestive system and bone marrow are especially sensitive. When they are damaged, the body loses its ability to produce new blood cells at a normal rate. That leads to cascading failure in oxygen transport and immune defense. The most dangerous part is that all of this begins silently. There is no instant collapse signal. The body continues functioning while damage spreads beneath the surface, layer by layer, without detection until systems start to fail in sequence. The body is not the only system that begins to fail. On Mars, the mind follows close behind. At this stage, multiple stressors overlap at once: isolation, oxygen instability, radiation exposure. Each one affects the brain in a different way, but together they create a state the human nervous system was never designed to handle. The brain depends on a stable environment more than any other organ. Even small changes in oxygen levels or blood chemistry can alter how it processes reality. On Mars, those small changes become constant. Neurons begin to misfire under oxygen stress. Signals between different parts of the brain lose timing and clarity. Thoughts that should be smooth become fragmented. At first, it feels like distraction, short lapses in focus, difficulty holding simple ideas in mind. Words take longer to form, but as stress increases, the distortion becomes deeper. Radiation damage adds another layer. It does not just affect cells in the body. It can also affect neural tissue over time, changing how circuits communicate. Combined with oxygen instability, this creates moments where perception itself becomes unreliable. Sounds may seem closer or farther than they are. Simple tasks require repeated effort. Memory becomes inconsistent with gaps forming in short time spans. In extreme conditions, hallucinations can begin. These are not always visual in the dramatic sense often described. They can be subtle. A sense of presence that is not there. A false memory of an action just completed. Misinterpretation of sensor readings or environmental feedback. The brain, under pressure, tries to create order from incomplete signals. Sometimes that order is incorrect. At the same time, the body is flooded with stress hormones. Adrenaline and cortisol levels rise sharply. These chemicals are meant to help survival in short bursts. They increase alertness and energy. But on Mars, the trigger does not stop, so the cardiovascular system remains in a constant state of strain. Heart rate stays elevated for longer than it should. Blood pressure fluctuates under unstable oxygen conditions. This sustained stress begins to reduce efficiency instead of improving survival. Decision-making becomes impaired. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and rational choices, begins to lose control over emotional and instinctive regions of the brain. Choices become reactive instead of calculated. Simple problems feel overwhelming. Prioritization breaks down. This is one of the most dangerous stages because survival depends heavily on correct decisions, a delayed reaction, a wrong adjustment to life support, a missed warning signal. Each small mistake compounds rapidly. Panic responses begin to dominate behavior. Panic increases oxygen consumption dramatically. Breathing becomes faster and less efficient. Movements become less controlled, wasting energy and accelerating physical strain. In low oxygen environments, this creates a feedback loop. The more panic increases, the faster oxygen reserves are depleted. The faster oxygen drops, the more panic intensifies. Even minor injuries become harder to manage under this condition. Pain perception changes, making it difficult to assess severity accurately. By this point, the distinction between mental and physical collapse begins to blur. The brain is no longer fully guiding the body, and the body is no longer providing stable feedback to the brain. Both systems begin to fail together, each accelerating the decline of the other. Mars does not end a life in a single moment. There is rarely a clean and sudden ending. Instead, it works in stages. Each system in the human body begins to fail under a different pressure. One fails because of lack of oxygen. Another fails because of low pressure. Another breaks slowly under radiation damage. Another collapses under stress that the mind cannot control. Nothing is designed to survive all of these conditions at the same time. Not the lungs, not the blood, not the brain, not even the smallest cell inside the body. This is what makes Mars different from almost any environment known to humanity. It does not need a single catastrophic event to end survival. It only needs small failures that continue without interruption. A slight drop in oxygen, a small delay in system response, a weak point in shielding, a brief moment of human error. Each one seems minor on its own, but on Mars, nothing remains minor for long. The human body is built for balance. Earth provides that balance naturally. Air pressure, oxygen levels, temperature stability, radiation protection. Mars removes almost all of it, so survival becomes something entirely different. It is not just technology protecting humans. It is constant resistance against an entire planet that does not support life in any natural way. Even inside advanced habitats, the environment outside never stops trying to break in. There is no pause, no relief, no true stability without constant maintenance. This changes the meaning of colonization. It is not exploration in the traditional sense. It is continuous biological defense. Every breath, every system check, every moment of sleep depends on everything working exactly as intended. One small failure can begin a chain that the human body cannot reverse, and that is the most important part of all of this.
Mars does not always act loudly.
It does not always announce danger in obvious ways. Often, the most critical changes begin quietly at levels too small to notice at first. Inside the body, inside the air systems, inside the pressure balance that keeps life stable. By the time the effects become clear, the process may already be far along. So the real danger is not only what happens suddenly, it is what begins invisibly the moment protection is even slightly compromised. Humanity may one day take its first steps on Mars, but those first steps may also reveal something deeper than exploration. They may show how fragile life truly is when Earth is no longer beneath it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video and subscribe for more deep science stories that reveal what is really happening beyond our world.